Good morning and welcome back to the Duval 22 podcast. My name is Gus Logue. Very thrilled to be joined today by recurring podcast guest John Shipley of Jaguars on SI, here to break down the Jaguars' Week 6 loss to the Seattle Seahawks at home. 12-6 was the final tally. It was a pretty gnarly loss. The Jaguars had 6 sacks going into the game, and they took 7 on Sunday. They had 14 turnovers going into the game. They forced 0 on Sunday. I don't know how many penalties they had going into the game, but they added 10 more to the count on Sunday. So it was probably pretty easily the worst game of the Liam Cohen era so far. So John, before we get into the game, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being here. How you holding up?
I'm doing good, man. Looks like both our brains are fried. I've been completely just spaced out, and you said the score was 12-6. So we are chugging right
I
along.
saw I saw you shake your head. I was like, I feel like I looked at all these numbers beforehand. I don't think any of them are wrong, but I just said it wrong. Final score was 12-20. Yeah, I can't believe we're already at like a third of the way through the season. 6 out of 18 weeks are
It's flown by,
completed.
dude.
It
It,
feels more
it,
like
it, it, it's absolutely flown by. The
yeah,
NFL regular season always does, and but I mean, especially when it's a semi-interesting team, like when it's a terrible team, like the Mac Jones dying days of the Doug Peterson era Jaguars, like that went on for forever. But when it's a semi-interesting team, it always goes by a little quicker.
totally. Uh, the Jags have actually made some pretty interesting moves recently. Earlier today, they restructured Greg Newsome's contract. Yeah, exactly. What could this mean? They restructured Greg Newsome's contract. Um, that's actually what I wanted to talk about first. We'll get to all the contract restructurings later and what that could mean. But before we tackle the game itself, the Jaguars did trade away Tyson Campbell last week, essentially a player for player swap. Tyson Campbell for Greg Newsome. Newsome, unfortunately, in his first snap as a Jaguar, did allow a 61-yard touchdown to Jackson Smith and Jigba. So not really the start you'd like to see, obviously. But just real quick before we get to the game itself, John, I'm just curious your thoughts on the trade, if you were surprised that Campbell was moved, or more so that a move for a cornerback was made.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised Campbell was moved in the sense that like he didn't fit the entire mold of the guys they got rid previously. Like previously the guys they were shipping off, like they either didn't make sense from like they didn't make sense both schematically or culturally. Like Tank Bigsby clearly wasn't happy with, being a potential running back three. He was gone. Fred Johnson, they were legitimate issues with his, I'd say, effort while he was in Jacksonville. So, he was gone. Tyson Campbell is like the first guy that they've shipped away in like years. So I'm like, oh wow, he was actually a good guy. Like the locker room and culture will miss him. And Liam Cohen talked about that. He's like, it's hard to trade a guy who everybody likes, and that's how Tyson was, man. Tyson was as good of a soldier for the franchise as I think you can be. He was just, he was a good leader, played physical, played tough, played through injuries. Just he had two fatal flaws while he was with the Jaguars, injuries and finding a ball in the air. He seemed to put the injuries behind him, at least so far this year. But I mean, up until Sunday's game where they allowed two different 61-yard passes, I believe all four of their longest plays allowed against the pass all came against Tyson Campbell. And it came in like 4 week stretch. It was like one in week two, one in week three, one in week four, one in week five. And it definitely seemed like that one against Kansas City, the Tyquan Thornton one, which you would think like the way that play happened, like it's like the perfect situation for a corner to pick it, but it ends up, putting the Chiefs in the scoring position. Felt like that was the kind of final nail in the coffin. Talking to people who aren't with the Jaguars, but who are, somebody who's in the league and, from what they told me they gathered is, the consensus around the league is the Jaguars just seemed really down on Campbell because of 4 or 5 explosive plays. And whether that's right or not is, obviously up to anybody's differing opinion, but that seems like what the Jaguars are basing it on. They seemingly didn't think he was a great scheme fit. And once it became clear that, he just wasn't going to be a great fit for their zone-based scheme, I mean, he was also one of the players that they had the most money invested in. And it's not like they're necessarily even saving a lot of money. Like they're paying more money this year for Greg Newsome than they would have for Tyson Campbell. And then
Hmm.
next year, you have like a $19 million dead cap hit paying him not to play for you. So you don't actually save any money trading Tyson Campbell until what 2027. So it wasn't even like a shrewd financial move. It was just a we don't want to keep paying this guy. Like a different regime paid him. We just want something else at corner. I thought adding Greg Newsome made sense. He kind of has a prototypical zone corner skill set. I think he kind of got screwed. First snap against JSN's a little tough to begin with, and then secondly, I mean, I put the play out there on Twitter. I put what Liam Cohen said. You can decipher it any way you want, but it definitely feels like it was a mix of he could have got better support from Andrew Wingard and also, tip of the cap to Clint Kubiak. It's just a really good play call by him, and they have the fastest slow receiver in the NFL. Somebody like tweeted at me like JSN doesn't win with speed. He wins with like route running precision. I'm like, man, you look pretty freaking fast
Yeah,
all day
exactly.
on Sunday, dude. I don't like know where this whole thing that he's not like I know where it comes from. It's 40, but like it's pretty freaking fast. So yeah, I was surprised just because I didn't think they'd move like a key locker room guy and starter while they were playing so well. But also, like if you had asked me, did I think they would want to keep Tyson past 2025? I would have said no to that as well. So it became pretty clear Tyson wasn't a part of their long-term plans, but I was a little surprised he wasn't part of their short-term plans. But I don't necessarily think it was a bad trade either. I think you can make a legitimate case that Greg Newsome fits the scheme better, despite kind of being thrown to the wolves against the Seahawks. And I can see, it opens up avenues for them past the season, past 2026 when you're done paying. For Tyson Campbell. And obviously, it can also set up a spot for Travis Hunter in either next year or in the near future to kind of step in as the number one cornerback on the team, which I think it's pretty clear the last few weeks that he is their best defensive back.
Yeah, I think when you look at it from like a far away approach or whatever, it's kind of like the Jaguars trade away a descending player for an ascending player. Greg Newsome has had a pretty solid year this season, including pretty solid outings against Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson earlier in the season when he was with the Browns, and it's especially a step up this year compared to last year was kind of a down year for him. And then Tyson, on the other hand, like I thought it was a great move by Trent Baalke and the Jaguars front office when they extended his contract last offseason. But he just clearly isn't the same player that he was in 2022 and just generally in the past. Like I personally, like in hindsight, definitely like was hanging on to that 2022 season a little bit too much and thinking like, oh, like cornerback play is super volatile. Like I think that because he's
So
shown
were
it
they.
before, he can get back to it. But like obviously there's like the big explosive plays that he's led up this season, which I think is where you can really see like the lack of finishing and like allowing receivers to kind of like break away in the final phase of their routes. You see those issues pop up as it has throughout his career, but then also even on like zone plays, like where he's like just reading and reacting to like things that are in front of him and like uh trying to like go and make a play on the ball, breaking on routes and stuff. Like he's definitely a little bit more hesitant, a little bit slower than he was in years past. And so maybe a little bit of that is like it is a new scheme. Maybe he's getting like his bearing in it. But I feel like he's been able to adjust to different schemes in the past. I think he's potentially maybe not like really trusting his body, or maybe his body's not really in a place to be trusted. And so obviously the injuries make it tough. He's a super talented player. Definitely wish him the best, even though his Cleveland debut went about as poorly as Greg Newsome's Jacksonville debut went. But I got balky balled. That's the end of the story. We can move on and talk about the actual game that we just
That,
witnessed.
that you had a terrific time tweet. Well, what was it like 2 minutes before Greg Newsome gave up
Yeah,
that play?
I just said like, yeah, I quote tweeted like Tyson Campbell letting up a touchdown and said, "Meanwhile in Cleveland," and then about 2 minutes later, Greg Newsome gets toasted.
You
So
had to
that
know
one
that
was
was
me.
gonna
I,
happen.
I,
And
I said, "Put my hand up." That one was on me.
the last part of it, I do think like trading. So they traded the Eagles seventh round pick and got the Jets sixth round pick. The Eagles seventh round pick, even though with them looking like an offensive mess, that it's obviously going to be a late seventh, and that Jets pick will be like an early sixth. It might as well be a late fifth. It's all that's probably like a 50 to 60 pick jump. So they're dumping a contract they don't want and also improving their draft position. I That was a really random part of it. That part of it was hard for me to wrap my mind. I was like, why is Andrew Berry conceding that part of the trade? Like just a straight swap would have made more sense.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you saw Mike Tomlin's comments, but
Oh, I saw.
he's pretty confused about what goes on in Andrew Barry's head as well. But yeah,
If
that was definitely a nice little win for the Jaguars as they continue to recoup draft capital. We'll see what it could be for. But to get to the game, the Jaguars' offense was not good. They did have a touchdown wiped off the board from a Travis Hunter offsides penalty, but the touchdown itself was like a little bit of a prayer ball, a little bit of a miracle. Like it was literally like
It,
in a Seahawks defender's hands and then fell out of it into Brian Thomas's
well,
hands, who ran into
I'd
the end
say it was the
zone.
dumbest Jaguars touchdown I've ever seen, if not for Trevor Lawrence 6 days earlier.
Yeah, pretty much. So, John, what did you see from the offense? And like, I'm certainly teeing you up for this question, but what went wrong on Sunday?
I mean, they just got teed off against the Seahawks defensive front. I really don't think it's any deeper than that. I thought Liam Cohen put it well. He was like, they got after our quarterback, we didn't get after theirs. They had explosive pass plays, we didn't, and that to me is what it was. Trevor had the one really bad miss to Diami downfield. I want to say they ended up scoring on that drive anyways, and like he came back on third down with an impressive throw. I don't think it was a bad Trevor game. I think anytime you ask him to throw it 50 times, you're going to get a couple like, Jesus Christ, what was that? Type throws.
Most
I
definitely.
thought he was probably the worst he's been this year at reacting to pressure. Like when he tried to scramble in the very first play, I turned to Demetrius Harvey in the press box and was like, all right, this guy bought way too much into the scrambling thing
Yeah.
from last week, and then holding on the second play, which he said was on him. So that entire first drive was really rough. I think overall, though, it was just a case of the offensive line got teed off against. It's a good Seahawks defensive line, but they're a better run stopping line and pass rushing line.
Hmm.
They hadn't really dominated an offensive line pass rushing like they did on Sunday, but they definitely did on Sunday. Liam Cohen said he thought a lot of it were like twists and stunts, and they were just giving up too much ground on those. Walker Little clearly had a rough game. I didn't think Jonah Monheim had a bad game at all, especially in pass pro. Liam Cohen, I'm glad he said it. He even went on record to say, like, people are probably going to say Jonah Monheim, the rookie center, was the big change that led to this, and he actually played well. And I agree with him. Jonah Monheim probably had the best game of any of the offensive linemen, honestly, because it was a rough game for pretty much everybody. They didn't get anything going in the run game, which I think everybody kind of knew was going to be the case going into the game. But I also think that bias that they had, knowing that it was going to be tough to run the ball, kind of made them run the ball less than they should have. Again, Cohen noted that he probably got away from the run too early, especially in the second half. I thought Trevor made some impressive plays out of structure. He had that one like fourth down throw across his body, which felt like a throw like in Madden where you hit the wrong button. But
Literally.
I mean, it worked. The Tim Patrick touchdown. He had a couple nice throws to Brian Thomas. The touchdown that got wiped off was actually probably his worst throw of the day.
Yeah.
It was honestly the first game where I felt like watching Travis Hunter where I actually got fantasy pill brain and was like, they need to get him the ball more because I mean he makes that one really nice play on just a little check down where he breaks the Seahawks defender's ankle and gets the first down. And then they didn't really go to him after that. I think he had an average depth yard of targets of only average depth yard of his target was only 4 yards. I mean, he had that one pass into the end zone was his only real one downfield, and that one he never had a chance of really catching. The screens are I don't know the screens just aren't working. Like teams
Yeah.
are just clearly so keyed in on them that they're not working. And I just felt like throughout the course of the game, like they needed an offensive spark. Try to get the ball, to Travis. It just feels like there's more ways outside of screens and what they're doing with him that they can't give him the ball. But then again, he's not just another receiver, and I understand that. I understand that there's a lot of things you can't ask him to do from a mental workload standpoint, just because he's also having to learn defense, and like you're gonna put too much on his plate. But I mean, it's still clear through week 6 that he doesn't that his brain is kind of getting fried every other play, which people obviously again fantasy analysts keep harping on the he's not playing receiver enough, he's not being utilized enough. I thought he wasn't utilized enough on Sunday, but it's also a case of it's hard to utilize a guy if he doesn't really know what he's doing, and for valid reasons it does seem like he doesn't have a great understanding of a lot of the things that they're asking him to do. But he's also not the only one. I mean, they got several dumb penalties. Parker Washington has looked lost several times Brian Thomas Jr. has looked lost a few times. Brian Thomas Jr. slipped out of his route on a key third down, lets a pass, hit his hand, incomplete, lets another pass, he dropped. He had a good game outside of those two targets, but those two targets loomed pretty large. So I thought it was just a case of, the receivers are still making mistakes. They don't really have the proper infrastructure for Travis Hunter to thrive at receiver because they need him so much at corner. And then the offensive line just kind of got exposed. I think it was the offensive line that a lot of people probably expected. Like they were probably punching above their weight early on in the season.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they're as bad as they were this week, but I do think this was probably a closer reflection to what they are than like the 49ers game where they just gave up like zero pressure.
Yeah, most likely. And I do think like credit to Seattle for sure, because even if like their biggest name is DeMarcus Lawrence in like the twilight of his career, like they have probably like one of, if not the most like just coordinated rushing attacks in terms of like the way they play off each other, the way they're able to do stunts in games and sim pressures and different exotic blitzes. That's a really good, just well coached unit, and they've got like I feel like they roll eight deep in terms of guys that can rush the passer. I think they had like five different guys have 4+ pressures against the Jaguars on Sunday, which is just ridiculous. And so like at a certain point, like it's like that's a pretty obvious on paper mismatch. And so it does seem like Cohen kind of like ignored that a little bit too much and was too focused on like the Seahawks missing three of their top defensive backs via injury. And like, because I feel like if there was like a stat for like average depth of route for a team, then like I think the Jaguars like ran further downfield on the routes more in this game than any other game so far in the season, which generally speaking is I think is a good thing because like the downfield production definitely needs to go up, but it just was not the move against this team. I think that part of the reason that Lawrence was running around and scrambling so much, including on that first play, like you mentioned, is just because there's not a lot of guys open downfield and the pass rush is getting home immediately. Like they had a few like big plays, I feel like to the sideline and like cover three beater types. And that was really the only thing that the Seahawks were letting up. And like at the end of the day, like I feel like they ran one quick concept in the passing game, and that should have been closer to like five or six to try to neutralize the pass rush. Like Cohen did say that they tried out the bubble screens, that didn't work. And I will say that it was a pretty cool like in-game adjustment to do the fake bubble screen to spring Brian Thomas open for the touchdown. But it just kind of felt like that was the only adjustment that the Jaguars coaching staff made all day, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And so I think that really it's like everyone's at fault. I mean, Cohen kind of put his hand up after the game and said it's on me, especially in terms of like the pre-snap penalties and just like the lack of it being a smooth operation. But Cohen has a hand in it, the quarterback, the offensive line, the pass catchers, yeah, everyone. And so pretty ugly effort. It's definitely not great. The Jaguars' next opponent is Jared Verse and the Rams, who are like a really similar opponent where like Jared Verse is like a kind of like he's awesome. So like he's like gonna be a household name eventually, but it's definitely like a collective group effort from the Rams pass rush unit like it is for Seattle's. And so doesn't bode well for week 7 against the Rams in London. But to move to the defensive side of the ball, John, I actually think that the Jaguars were pretty solid for the most part. Like they definitely allowed a few explosive plays. There's a Jackson Smith and Jigba touchdown. There's two different plays where he routed up Monteric Brown and then Jordan Lewis on the sideline with like just a nasty post corner route that had absolutely no meat on the bone. And so like I feel like beyond Jackson Smith and Jigba's three explosive plays there, and then the AJ Barner 61-yarder late in the game against Andrew Wingard, like those four plays were kind of like the name of the game for Seattle's offense against Jacksonville's defense. Because beyond that, the Jaguars or the Seahawks went 1 for 12 on third downs, and I feel like they really couldn't get anything going in the second half beyond that Barner long catch to seal it. And so, what did you think about the defensive performance on Sunday?
Yeah, I thought, they did some things well. They stopped the run a lot better than they did a week before, like significantly better, and against two running backs who are just immensely more talented than Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. So
Totally.
they stopped the run a lot better. They did decent against like the quick game passing, and like Liam Cohen said, like they didn't get much pressure at all. But Liam Cohen kind of detailed he was like yeah, there's a cat coming behind me. Ignore him. Um that the Seahawks were either going quick game or they were doing a lot of like max protect with like 7 or 8 guys in, and it's hard to really get pressure when doing that unless you're sending a lot of pressure. It felt like that was one adjustment the Jaguars probably should have made. They should have sent pressure, I think, more often earlier in the game. They kind of waited till the second half, and then once they did, they started impacting Sam Darnold more. But it really came down to, I think, like 4 plays. It's two different JSN plays. Obviously, the huge touchdown that we mentioned, and then he had like another like 30 something yard gain to get them into,
Right. The deep
scoring
crosser.
position. Yeah, and there was that really kind of inexcusable gain to AJ Barner at the end of the game, 61 yards, and then Cooper Kupp got like a 29-yard gain, like over the middle. Like those 4 plays are what had the Seahawks score 20 points. It boils down to it. So it kind of shows you the margin of error on the defense when you don't create turnovers. Is that they played really well outside of probably about 4 plays, but those 4 plays, kind of killed them that day. And that's kind of been an issue with the defense. They haven't really been dinked and dunked on and like surgically just marched down the field on, but each week, even going back to week 1 to an extent, they've given up the chunk plays, the big explosive plays that have hurt them. That's been kind of their MO to this point. There's been cornerbacks getting beat. There's been safeties getting beat, which happened a couple times, on Sunday. And then I thought, we kind of saw what happens when the turnovers dry up. It looked like they had multiple chances at turnovers. Travis Hunter had a deflection at the end of the first half that somehow went through BJ Green's hands. It seemed like Eric Murray and Antonio Johnson each would have potentially had a chance at a pick at a different point in the game too. So it felt like the opportunities were there. They just didn't take advantage of them. So you kind of saw what the defense looks like when turnovers don't happen, which is like a solid, okay defense, but one that didn't do anything to kind of balance out the big plays that it was giving up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the defensive line, I feel like, is almost as big of a concern as the offensive line is coming off of this past game. Trayvon Walker, like, was pretty ineffective. It felt like he barely saw the field. I don't know
I
how
played
many,
like
like,
16 snaps, I think.
16 snaps. There you go. And so we can assume that his like workload will ramp up a little bit week over week as he continues to recover from his wrist surgery. He was wearing a club on Sunday, but like Josh Hines Allen had a really quiet game, probably his quietest of the season. And then like right now, Eric Armstead, I believe, is the team leader in sacks. He actually did have a pretty nice game on Sunday, but like the pass rush is just not doing enough. I believe the Jaguars ranked 25th in pressure rate when sending 4 going into Sunday, and they're probably even lower than that now. And so, my question for you, John, as we wrap up, is like I was getting ahead of myself a little bit earlier, but it seems like with the Jaguars restructuring several contracts of the past several days, including Greg Newsome's today, perhaps they're looking at making another trade. I don't think it's necessarily a secret. Like not just in local media, but even like national guys are kind of speculating that James Gladstone and company could be making another move after bringing in Greg Newsome last week. And so, my question is like what position do you think that they'll be looking to target most between offensive line, defensive line, secondary? I think we both think they could use a different starter next to um, Eric Murray after last week. But wide receiver is also something I think that Mike DeRocco has mentioned. And so, what are your thoughts leading into the November 4th trade deadline?
Yeah, I think if there's two positions that, you know, from at least my read of the situation, the organization that they might trade for, I'd say tight end and defensive line, whether
Mm.
that's edge or defensive tackle are both on the board. Like, obviously, they're going to get Brendan Strange back at some point, but until they do, they just like the tight ends basically might as well not even be like on the roster. They like Johnny Munt's a good blocker. Hunter Long has been an okay receiver, but I mean you're getting below average, level play from the tight end position until Brendan Strange comes back. You could probably use a running mate for him anyways when he does come back. I think adding a guy like Josh Oliver would honestly be a pretty prudent move. I mean, he has a similar skill set to Brendan Strange. You can kind of, work them off one another once Brendan Strange comes back. Defensive tackle, I mean, they clearly need somebody to kind of make a bigger impact. I think Devon Hamilton's been solid. Eric Armstead's had some flashes here and there, but he's clearly not the guy that they thought they were getting when they signed him in free agency. Mason Smith, again, it's been more flash than I think actual substance. Like he's made a few nice plays here and there, but you're not getting like consistently good play from him, I don't think. And then Austin
True.
Johnson, probably is a guy who isn't active, on most, 53 man rosters. And then, I mean, their backup defensive ends, I mean, Dewan Smoot and Emmanuel Ogbah, just the metrics are really poor for them in terms of pass rush efficiency. They're getting very little out of those guys. Dennis Gardeck hasn't really been used much as a pass rusher, I'm assuming because of, he's still coming off his knee injury, which, probably saps a good bit of his explosiveness and his first step. So, I think tight end and defensive line in some facet. I don't expect them to target a receiver. I don't expect them to target a safety. Maybe you see Antonio Johnson at some point, play a little bit more, but after Caleb Bransall got hurt, it kind of just seems like their bed is kind of made at safety. But I mean, you and I talked about it before. I mean, called Andrew Wingard and Eric Murray probably the slowest safety duo in the NFL, and that's what it's looked like. Eric Murray's actually I don't think Eric Murray's given up many big plays, but like starting Wingard has come back to bite them in the last couple of weeks. The bit has kind of run its course, if you
Yeah.
will. So but I don't really think that they're going to add two safeties. So if there were two positions, I'd guess somewhere on the defensive trenches or somewhere at tight end. That's at least my guess and my kind of understanding right now.
Gotcha. Well, John, we appreciate your insight as always. I'm sure we'll have you back on before that November 4th trade deadline. Maybe I'll bring you back on during the bye week and we can just t talk big picture stuff. But yeah, you got anything else you want to get off your chest? Any hot takes? Anything you want to plug?
I think I already said on one of these episodes that I was concerned with Cam Little.
Mm,
That hasn't changed.
yeah, that's tough.
Grow, growing concern with Logan Cook to an extent.
Mm,
Um, I'd start Parker Washington over Downey Brown.
yeah.
And like Hines Allen has had a quiet last two games, but and yeah, I know I'm probably seen as the Hines Allen apologist. I could care less, but maybe you like look at how offenses are playing him. It's pretty clear that opposing teams see him as the only viable threat on the Jaguars defensive line. Like while Walker's banged up. But I mean, a zero pressure game. I looked up. It was only hit the fourth zero pressure game he's had in his career. So
Mm,
obviously wasn't the kind of impact that he normally makes, but they definitely I'm with you. I was probably more concerned with the pass rush than even I was with the offensive line because like I expected the offensive line to be kind of mediocre this year. I was surprised at the early season returns. I expected the defensive line though to be better than it has been and be
mm.
more disruptive. It kind of seems like Campanelli has had to blitz to get pressure, and I think like he would rather like just drop seven.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he wants guys in coverage, but I like the Parker Washington take for sure. I think they definitely should arguably get playing time over Travis Hunter, considering they have kind of like similar roles. But even De'Ami Brown, I feel like De'Ami Brown had like a really nice three catches for 52 yards in the season opener, and I was like, yeah, that's exactly what we were looking for in like a number three receiver, just a guy that can make a couple big blocks, make a couple big catches, and just fill that role. But he's been pretty up and down in the months since then. He is going through a shoulder injury, so who knows how much that has impacted him. But Parker Washington, even though I think it was the Houston game where he had like two drops and was kind of disappointing after seeming like he was trending up. Overall, he has been arguably the Jaguars' like most consistent and dependable receiver, and so certainly would not mind seeing more playing time for Parker Washington. But until next time, John, thanks again. Check out John's work at _John_Shipley on
That's
X,
right.
John Shipley on Blue Sky, jaguars.com/SI.
I haven't posted on Blue Sky in months, so they people upset me on there a couple months ago, and I've been rebelling. So you can find me on Twitter.
There you go. Thanks, John. I'll probably be back later in the week to recap or to preview the Jaguars Rams London game. Yeah, that'll do it. Thanks, John. Have a good week. Peace, guys.